Still working our way through the Revelation series. We're into week number 5, and we're looking at the church in Sardis. Now, we don't know as much about Sardis as some of the other cities. We know that a lot of the famous history stuff about Sardis, a lot of it had already happened by the time John's writing this letter. They'd kind of faded from being a really important city. Still had a lot of money, but they'd kind of faded away from being the same important city they were at other times. They were on a trade route, and a lot of business floated through and in and out of Sardis, but it was kind of a town more famous for yesterday than it was for today. One thing they did kind of have going for them was a temple for a goddess named Cybele. And Cybele, a lot of sexual immorality tied to the worship there, a lot of temple prostitution, and it was a big part of their city. I mean, people traveled to Sardis to go to that temple. It was a lot of wickedness, a lot of drinking and immorality there, and people would go there and go to Sardis to be part of that and to be in the middle of that. And Cybele had a reputation. It was known as a goddess a mother goddess who could breathe new life into or could give birth to people even after they had died. And it may be some of that Jesus has in mind here when it all starts out. It says, "To the angel of the church in Sardis write, these are the words of him who holds the 7 spirits of God and the 7 stars." And that language about 7, probably just referring to the 7 churches here that he's talking about. So Jesus says, I'm the one who's in charge of the 7 churches. And ultimately, I'm the one who's in charge of the church, period. And then he says, I know your deeds, and you have a reputation for being alive, but you're dead. And there's a couple things here about the church of Sardis. Again, maybe that Cybele thing, she was known as a resurrection goddess, and maybe he's kind of, challenging that there at the very beginning. I'm really the one who can breathe life into someone. I'm really the one who understands life and death. It could be some of that going on. I'm not sure. But certainly you get from this thing that Jesus can see what they're up to. Now, this is a church that had a good reputation. And compared to some of the churches we've read about, they're not going through a lot of persecution. They're not going through a lot of attacks. It's kind of it should be the best of times for them. But he says, in spite of that, you're not doing anything. You remember the church in Ephesus, one of the first ones we did, they had lost their first love. And you kind of pick up some of that with Sardis here too, that maybe, at first you were doing it because you loved Jesus, and now, you're going through the motions, and you're really busy. You're just not doing anything. You're just not accomplishing anything. It was kind of a model of an inoffensive, certainly catered to everybody kind of a church, but they were dead. Their problem wasn't that they were wicked exactly, just up to nothing. At least nothing important. At least nothing that Jesus would have really cared about. And I think we think about churches and can we relate to what Sardis was going through? Is there anything about Sardis' experience that maybe we could look at and say, well, man, we don't want that to happen here? Well, yeah. I think that's certainly an indictment of a lot of American churches, and I hope it's not something that Mount Pleasant does. But it's the kind of thing we got to keep an eye on, because it's real easy to get so satisfied with all the stuff you're doing, but then not really ask yourself hard questions. But are people being changed here? Are people coming to know Jesus here? Are we seeing the fruit of the Spirit here? Not just in attendance numbers or offering numbers or building size. Those are all mathematic abstractions that we do to determine whether a church is doing well. But is the fruit of the Spirit showing up there? Is it a church that's loving and peaceful and kind? If it's not, it could be a church like this one here. I said, I know what you like. You do a lot of stuff, but it's just not. It's not the kind of stuff that Jesus really cares about. So he says, wake up. Wake up, he says. Be watchful. Pay attention to the stuff going on, because he says, I see what you're up to, and it's lazy. He says, you need to strengthen what remains and is about to die. There's some good stuff there, but he says, I find your deeds unfinished. You're not going that last 10%. You're not doing the full measure of what it is to follow after Jesus. You're just inattentive. Sardis historically was kind of famous because it had been taken over twice. It was built on top of big cliffs. It was supposed to be kind of an unbeatable city, and yet it had fallen twice. And both times it had fallen, it's because they put all their confidence in their big walls and how tall they were in these cliffs, and they weren't even guarding it. The first guy to roll through it was King Cyrus of Persia, and as he's watching to see what we're going to do, they see a soldier on the top of the wall at Sardis, and he drops his helmet. And so they kind of watch him, and he takes a secret path down the side. And so the Persians go, okay, well, that's the path we'll go up. And so they go up this secret path up the side of the mountain. And when they get up there, there's nobody there guarding it. They were just so confident that they had it all together. The city was that they didn't do anything. Well, this church kind of has some of that going on. I mean, they're so confident that they're going to be fine. They're so confident that they're doing enough that well, he says, your deeds remain unfinished. And again, I mean, I think this is not the epitaph you want on your church, when they're talking about us one of these days. We don't want that to be said of us. And so the solution is, first, wake up. That's the first commandment. Wake up. Second commandment. There's 2 or 3 commandments here. Let's see here. Wake up is the first one. Wake up, and it's an imperative. Go do something. Strengthen, he says, what remains. On purpose. Start exercising your faith. Don't just rely on what you used to do. Do more. Remember, he says. Remember, start thinking about what it is that you've received and heard. Think about the gospel story. Think about what Jesus has done. And not just that. Think about the great saints who have went before you, the ones who laid the foundation, the ones who really did care and sacrificed so much to get us to that point. Remember what they did. He says, hold fast. Remember that and hold on to it and then repent. He says, if you don't, I'm going to come like a thief and you're not going to be ready. Now that's an illustration Jesus has used in the Gospels. That's a thing we've seen tied to Jesus before. If you knew when the thief was coming, if he set an appointment, you'd be ready. You'd either have a guard there, or you'd have a gun, or you'd have a big dog or something. You'd be ready but the thief doesn't set an appointment. He comes at a time you're not expecting. And Jesus says, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to come when you're not ready, and it's all going to be over. He says, you have a few people in Sardis who have not soiled their clothes. They walk with me, dressed in white. He says the ones who are victorious, they'll be like that. It's an interesting word picture, that we go through our lives and he gives us clean clothes. When we're baptized, when we make a decision to follow Christ, we're given clean clothes and we're made white. But then some people, they've let it get soiled. They've spent time places they shouldn't. They've done things that they shouldn't. They've allowed themselves to kind of be unironed and unkempt. And he says, not everybody's like that. There's a few of you out there who are still, it's an interesting word picture. To think of how Jesus sees our church, that when he looks at us, that there's some people who are dressed in white. I mean, they shine. And it may not be the people who are wearing the very best clothes normally. It may not be the richest people in the church. It may not be the most important people. But they shine. The whole quality of their life shines. And he says, you've got a few like that. And I think again, he's hoping that those few will start to affect the majority. That those few will start to affect everybody. And I pray for that at Mount Pleasant. I pray for that at every church. I mean, we want to get our eyes on the people who are doing it. Because one day, he says, the victorious will be like that. He says, I won't blot their names out of the name of that person out of the book of life, and I will acknowledge his name before the Father and his angels. There's an interesting story at the end of Revelation. It talks about a great library. And when I used to teach about this, I remember the Beauty and the Beast cartoon. He gives Belle this great library, and there's books everywhere, right? And it's that kind of picture, just high as you can see and as far as you can see, books and books and books. And at the end of our lives, we'll stand before God. At one of the pictures of Revelation in a room like that, and all those books are the stories of our lives, and they'll pull off one book, and it's the story of your life, and they'll look through it, and there'll be some light and some dark in there probably, right? There'll be some good and some bad in there. Maybe, if we're being honest, a lot more bad than we wish. And in the middle of that, you might be feeling pretty bad as they're reading through the story of your life. Oh, I'm never going to make it in, But he says there's another book in the middle of that, a book of life. And if your name is written there, then Jesus has vouched for you. And he's vouched for some of these, even some of the ones with dirty clothes. And so he says, wake up. He says, wake up. I've invested everything in you, and now it's time for you to start living up to your potential. I think there's a lot here about Sardis that we can apply to Mount Pleasant. I found it really interesting to kind of get into it, and I hope as you're studying it, you're able to pull some things out too.